Hello everyone, hope you're all keeping well. If you're watching this, it's because you want to know what happens next in our class reader, the story we never got a chance to finish. Michael Morpurgo's Farm Boy. Now, we just got to the part where Grandpa had revealed his big secret, that he couldn't read or write, but that his wife had been teaching him before she died. He'd asked his grandson to help him read and write, and he'd bet him £100 that with a couple of hours teaching for 3 months, he would soon be able to read and write. And in fact, he bet him £100, saying you can use it when you go off on your travels, but just stay at the farm for 3 months. I'll pick up where we left off. He'd barely given me time to wash his hands. To begin with, he learnt all of his reading from newspapers. He liked the large print, and the photographs helped him to guess a word when he couldn't quite work it out. Any new word he came across, he'd write it in his book. That way, I thought he could practice his reading and writing at the same time. He found the writing harder. He said his fingers wouldn't do what he told them to. Mostly, he'd find ways to laugh off his failures. But from time to time, when things wouldn't go right, he'd become angry and morose, and then I'd leave him to get on by himself. Now, after a while, I could see the newspapers weren't helping. He'd sit silent through a meal, dwelling on some dreadful story he'd just struggled so hard to read. One evening, after he'd read a piece about yet another savagery in Bosnia, I saw there were tears in his eyes. "Don't it ever stop," he said. "I can mind Father telling me there'd be no more wars, not after his one. It shames me. It shames all of us. What's the good in reading if that's all there is to read about?" Picture for you to take a look at. I tried the Farmer's Weekly. That's a magazine for farmers. I tried the Farmer's Weekly on him for a while, but the print was small. And besides, he'd said, he'd done farming all his life, didn't want to read about it too. Then there was a jumble sale up at Iddersley Village Hall that produced a sudden and unexpected treasure, a copy of Animal Farm and Travels with a Donkey and a dozen Tintin books, but best of all, a dictionary and a magnifying glass. After that, his reading seemed to come up in leaps and bounds. His writing, that was slower though. He couldn't seem to manage joined up very well, so I didn't make him. He would print each letter very deliberately, pressing down too hard on the paper, often breaking his pencil. He went through pencils like he was eating them, but he never let up, not for a single day. Some nights he'd stay up till midnight and he'd still be at it. I'd be dead on my feet longing for bed. When it came to the lessons, it was Grandpa that was the slave driver, not me. On Christmas Eve at midnight, he took me up the lane to the barn. "I want to show you something," he said in a whisper, and he opened the door slowly. "Same every year. Look at this." And he switched on the light. The cows on one side lay in the straw, blinking at us, and on the other side the sheep eyed us lazily. "All kneeling, see," said Grandpa. "Christmas Eve, and they're all kneeling, just like they was in the stable 2,000 years ago. Another picture for you. "They're lying down, Grandpa, not kneeling," I said. "And besides, they always lie down in the middle of the night." "Do you want your Christmas present or not, you miserable beggar?" he chuckled, gripping me by the back of my neck. "Now, my lad, are they kneeling or are they laying?" "Kneeling, Grandpa," I squealed, and he released my neck. He smiled at me, sat down on a bale of straw, patted the straw beside me, and told me to sit. He took a book from his coat pocket. This is what it looked like. "I've got a surprise for you," he said, and then he began, reading the title first. Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie, he said. Chapter 1. He read slowly, stumbling every now and again, his eyebrows meeting in a frown of frustration whenever he did. When he'd finished the chapter, he closed the book and he looked at me, a smile of wild exhilaration in his eyes. His face was flushed with the effort of it. "You'll get 2 chapters a day till I've done," he said. And so I did. Sometimes 3. So by the end, by New Year, he wasn't reading just the words, he was reading the story. A week or so later, I found myself on the train from Eggersford Junction to Exeter, my rucksack on the floor between my knees. I was on my way home, then off to Australia sometime in February. I should have been looking forward to it, but I was not. I had been a farm boy for only a few months and had loved every smelly, back-breaking moment of it. I had no real desire to travel anymore, nor to go to college. I'd hated leaving Grandpa all alone at Burrow. He'd waved me off rather abruptly, a quick pat on the head. "Off you go, miss your train else," he said. Then he turned away and gone inside. I'd just walked on. Here we have an illustration of him on that train. My rucksack tumbled over at my feet. As I picked it up, I saw a white envelope sticking out of its side pocket. I pulled it out. There were 10 £10 notes inside it. The bet! The £100 bet! I'd forgotten all about it. There was a note with it. It read, "I hope you like my story. I wrote it for you just to show you that I could. It's about the old Fordson tractor at the back of the barn. It's about Joey, and it's about me. Thanks a million for teaching me. God bless, Grandpa." After a short search, I found the story. It was folded down the inside of my rucksack. Just 6 crinkled sheets of paper, heavily indented with a black pencil. Every letter laboriously, meticulously formed. All of it quite legible. There wasn't much punctuation. We'd done capital letters and full stops, but not much more. Now we come to the second part of the story. This is called Grandpa's Story. When I was a little un, May Day up in Iddlesley village was always the best day of the year. There was the march around the village behind the Hathersley Silver Band, and all the menfolk following the Friendly Society banner, blue ribbons on their jackets, and father standing a head higher than any of the others. Remember, this is Grandpa's story, so he's talking about our narrator's great-grandfather. There were swing boats up around the village green, and a carousel and pasties and toffee apples and lemonade, and then in the afternoon we had games down on West Park Farm. We did all sorts of egg and spoon races and sack races, 3-legged races, skipping races. You name it, we did it. But best of all was chicken chasing. They let some poor old fowl loose in the middle of the field, and old Farmer Northley waved his flag, and off we went after him, the fowl, not old Farmer Northley. And if you caught him, well, he was yours to keep. We had some fun and games, I tell you. You could see more bloomers and petticoats on midday up in Iddlesley than was good for a chap. Here's a picture of him and his mates chasing that chicken. Every year I went after that cockerel just like everyone else, but I never caught him. I can mind it was the year that father caught him that it all happened. I were maybe 7 or 8 perhaps. He flew at father's face, and father had him and hung on in spite of all the flapping and squawking. We would have had a good supper out of that, and we were pleased as punch, I can tell you. Father and me stayed up in the village and Mother went off home with the fowl. Now there were a whole crowd of folk in the Duke of York, and as usual there were some that had too much of the beer or cider. It were rowdy in there, and I sat outside with the horses waiting for Father. It was drink that started the whole thing. Mother always said that afterwards. Harry Medlicote, he had West Park in them days, biggest farm in the parish it was. Harry Medlicote comes out of the Duke, drunk as a lord, and he knowed for it. He was a puffed up sort of chap, a bit full of himself. Had the first car in the parish, first tractor too. Anyway, Father and me were mounting up to leave. Father was on Joey and I was on Zoe. And this Harry Medlicote comes up. There's the scene. This Harry Medlicote comes up and says, "Look here, Corporal," he says. "You got to get yourself up to date, you have." "What do you mean?" says Father. "Those old two nags of yours. You should go and get yourself a proper, newfangled, modern tractor, like me." "What for?" says Father. "What for? What for? I'll tell you what for, Corporal," says he. "My Fordson can plough a field 5 times as fast as your 2 old bag of bones is. That's what for." "Bag of bones, is it?" says Father. "Bag of bones." Now everyone knows what Father thinks of his Joey and how he won't hear a word said against him. Common knowledge it was, at the time. Well, for a moment or two, Father just looks down at Harry Medlicote from on top of Joey. Then he leans forward and he talks into Joey's ear. "Do you hear that, Joey?" he says. Joey whips his tail and paws the ground like he wants to be off. A bit of a crowd was gathering now, most of them drunk as Harry Medlicote and laughing at us just like he was. "He don't much like what you're saying, Mr. Medlicote," says Father. "And what's more, neither do I." "Like it or not, Corporal," Harry Medlicote is still swigging his cider. "Like it or not, the days of horses is over. Look at them two, fit for nothing but the knacker's yard, if you ask me." There's the scene. 'Tis true that Father had drunk a beer or two. I'm not saying he hadn't, else I am certain sure he would have just rode away. I don't think he was ever as angry in all his life, but he was as upset then as I ever saw him. I could see that in my eyes. At any rate, he pats Joey's neck and tries to smile it off. "I reckon they're good enough for a few years yet, Mr. Medlicote," he says. "Good for nothing, I say, Corporal," and Harry Medlicote is laughing like a drain all the while. "I say a man without a tractor these days can't call himself a proper farmer. That's what I say." Father straightens himself up in his saddle, and everyone's waiting to hear what he's got to say, just like I was. "All right, Mr. Medlicote," says he. "We shall see, shall we? We will see if your tractor is all you say it is. Come ploughing time in November, I will put my 2 horses against your tractor, and we will see who comes off best, shall we?" Well, of course, by now, Harry Medlicote was splitting himself laughing, and so were half the crowd. "What's that, Corporal?" he says. "They 2 old nags against my new Fordson. I got a 2-furrow plough reversible. You got an old single furrow. You couldn't stand a dog's chance. I told you I can do 5 acres a day, easy. More, maybe. You haven't got a hope, Corporal." "Haven't I now?" says Father, and there's this steely look in his eye. "You're sure of that, are you?" "Course I am," says Harry Medlicote. "Right then," and Father says it out loud so everyone can hear. "Here's what we'll do then. We'll plough as many furrows as we can from 6:30 in the morning to 3:30 in the afternoon. Half an hour off for lunch. We'll have Farmer Northley do the judging at the end of the day. Furrows got to be good and straight, like they should be. And another thing, Mr. Medlicott, since you're so sure you'll win, we'll have a little bet, shall we? If I win, I drive away the tractor. If you win, there's 100 bales of my best meadow hay for you. What do you say? But my Fordson's worth a lot more than your 2 horses, says Harry Medlicott. Of course it is, says Father. But you're not going to lose, are you? So it don't matter, does it? And he held out his hand. There we go. He held out his hands for a while. He held out his hand. Harry Medlicott thinks for a while, but then he shakes Father's hand, and that was that. We rode off home, and Father hardly spoke a single word the whole way. We was unsaddling by the stables when he sighs deep and says, "Your mother's going to be awful vexed with me. I shouldn't have done it. I know I shouldn't. Don't know what came over me." We'll leave it there for now. If you'd like to know what happens next, I'll do another video tomorrow. But for now, don't let your parents get vexed at you. Stay safe. Bye.